All right, here's the lecture on Chapter 4 from How to Think About Weird Things, and it covers knowledge, belief, and evidence. So the chapter starts off by talking about ancient ways of acquiring knowledge of the future in Babylon. And one way you're probably familiar with, and that's astrology. But the other way is not very familiar today, and it's called hepatoscopy, which is examining sheep livers. And as you can tell, one of those is more popular today than the others. They also talk about propositional knowledge, but when they use that term, just think of it as regular old knowledge, what we talked about at the beginning of class, justified true belief. So they talk about how is it that we decide to believe something, and that's because of reasons and evidence. And the points they make in the chapter, one is, in order to reasonably accept a claim, all that is required is that the evidence support it better than any of its competitors. So what I tell people to think of is like the old-fashioned scales, and if there's two explanations for something, and one has more evidence than the other, you should believe the one that has more evidence. And sometimes there's more than two, but the analogy still holds. The next thing we should keep in mind is that we should be skeptical of claims that conflict with other propositions we have a good reason to believe. So if I was to make my phone float in front of you by some kind of trick and tell you that the reason it happened was because I have an anti-gravity device, well, that probably conflicts with something you already have good reason to believe, which is we don't have anything that can get rid of gravity. We haven't invented that yet. And probably it's more likely that I did it with some kind of fishing line or something like that. The next point the authors make is the more background information a claim conflicts with, the more reason there is to doubt it. So using the earlier example, if you said, well, wait, where did you get that anti-gravity device? And I said, well, Santa Claus gave it to me. Well, now there's yet another reason to doubt my claim. And all of this can be summed up by the words of the late, great Carl Sagan. And he said, incredible claims require incredible evidence. So if somebody was to say to you, oh, you know how I got here tonight? I took the bus. Okay, that's not a very incredible claim. It's totally believable. If, on the other hand, they said, you know how I got here tonight? I rode over in a UFO. Okay, well, that's an incredible claim, right? So if somebody said, I took the bus here, and the evidence they gave for you that they took the bus was they had a selfie of themselves on the bus, that's good enough evidence. It's not an incredible claim. A selfie on the bus should suffice. But if they said they came on a UFO, and you said, I don't believe that, and they're all, hey, and then they show you a little selfie on their phone of them sitting inside something that looks like a UFO, that evidence is not really that incredible, right? It doesn't kind of match up to how crazy the claim is. For you to believe that some aliens took them there on some weird craft, one little picture on their phone shouldn't convince you of that. They easily could have photoshopped it, or there's some app of put yourself on a UFO, who knows. So, if they said that they came in a UFO, they should be able to provide incredible evidence, like maybe take you outside and show you the UFO, or take you for a ride on it, or something like that. If they could do that, if they took you outside and you saw a spacecraft and you got in it and flew to the moon with them, that is indeed incredible evidence, and then you would be justified in believing that, but not just a picture. The chapter gets into expert opinion, because frequently we believe things based on expert opinion. And the authors say that there is indeed good reason to doubt a claim if it conflicts with expert opinion. So if, doctors say that something doesn't work or does work, that's a good reason to believe it if it's some kind of medical treatment. But the big question is, who is an expert? And to help us sort that out, they have a few principles you should follow. One is that someone who's an expert in one field isn't always an expert in another. And this comes up a lot. You might know somebody who is a doctor, and then they might try to give you advice on your car. And maybe they don't know anything about cars, but just because they know a lot about medical science doesn't mean they know, about automotive science. Another thing is if you're trying to compare two people in the same field. Let's say, you've got some medical advice and there are two doctors talking to you and they're giving different advice. Well, those who have achieved a position of authority or gotten some kind of award or honor are more likely to be the better expert. So let's say your geology professor at your community college tells you something, and then you find out that some other geologist who won the Nobel Prize last year said the opposite. Well, probably the Nobel Prize winner is right, and the community college professor is not. It could be the other way, but chances are. Next, you've got to be aware that certain people who seem to be experts might not. And a lot of times on news programs I've seen this. They'll bring on someone who is a, quote, author or doctor. And what you need to ask is, well, they're an author, but in addition to that, do they have any other credentials? Maybe they're writing a book about parenting. Well, do they have a degree in child psychology or, education or something which is at least somewhat relevant to, teaching or raising a kid? You could be an author. Anybody can write anything and you can self-publish. So you too could be an author. And nowadays with electronic publishing, some people who just post something on the internet claim to be an author. Then just calling someone a doctor, you need to follow up on where did they get their degree? Was it an actual real college? There are a lot of diploma mills out there that'll just sell you a doctorate for a few $100s, print you up a fancy certificate, but it doesn't mean anything. There's also a lot of official sounding organizations that lack credibility, and one of which that I mention here is the Institute of Historical Review. That sounds so official. It sounds like, wow, that must be some really important place which history professors go and study or something. And it's not very far from here. The IHR, Institute of Historical Review, is based in Irvine, California, but it is a white supremacist neo-Nazi organization which really just is in the business of denying the Holocaust. So, if you hear that someone is a doctor from there or a speaker from there, it doesn't mean anything. Another thing that's happening more and more is certain news organizations that want to appear balanced or just increase their ratings through controversy will take speakers from these organizations and give them some airtime just to kind of have something controversial happen on their channel to get viewers. Next, the authors want you to take a look at sources of knowledge. This is basically epistemology. How do we get our beliefs? One of which is perception, and this is one of our best sources. If you think about how you learn things, your eyes, sight is one of the main ways. Your ears, hearing things. In college, you're always reading, you're always listening to lectures, things like that. So it's a great way to learn, but they point out it's not infallible. I'm sure you've seen some optical illusions where this line looks longer than the other or something like that. So your eyes can deceive you. In fact, in the next chapter, we're going to be looking at quite a few optical illusions. And there's many ways where you can, you won't believe your eyes, and you shouldn't because they're lying to you. Then introspection, just thinking about things, and our memory. Those are also good sources. Most of the time, they're right. But they're less reliable than perception, because when you think about it, your memory of something, well, sometime in the past, you saw or heard it. And then assuming you saw or heard it correctly, as the days, weeks, months, and years pass, your memory kind of fades and you misremember things, and, you might have seen it properly, but now you're remembering it wrong. So, we should believe our memories, but we should also be aware that they could be wrong. So the authors say if there's no reason to doubt it, our introspection and our memory, we're justified in believing it. But there are 3 certain methods that they call out for being bad methods for justifying your beliefs. And the first is intuition, which is, just kind of getting a feeling that something is right or not right. Now, that might be a good reason for double checking things. A lot of times I'm like, I don't know about that. And then you look it up and you're like, that's right, it's not true, or something like that. But if there's no time to look something up, and you just think it's true or not true, if you have nothing else to go on, I guess go with it. But if you have the time, you should definitely double check. Your feeling isn't really a good reason for believing something. Now, a lot of times people find that they intuitively believe or don't believe something, or they believe or don't believe a person, and it turns out they were right. And science has shown that it's a little better than 50-50, that usually most of us can tell when somebody's lying or not. But that's to do with something else called HSP, or hypersensory perception. And you might have read a little bit about body language. And if you've ever had a young child of your own, or dealt with a younger brother, sister, or relative, you know that when they're lying or not. You'll hear something smash, you run into the room, you see the kid, and they're like, I didn't do it. And then you ask them what happened, and their eyes are down, and they're avoiding eye contact, and you can tell they're making something up. And that's because kids are really bad at hiding their body language, and we get to be better liars. By the time we're in middle school, we compensate for some of that. But you usually are not perfect unless you're a really good actor. And we can all pick up on those subtle things of body language. And people who are trained in hypersensory perception, actually are much better than the average person at telling that. But still, even people who know this stuff well, it's not 100% accuracy. The next method of knowing things, or thinking we know things, which they call out specifically as not being a good reason for believing or not believing things, is faith. And faith is defined as belief that doesn't rest on logical proof or material evidence. And the reason we can't just say something's right or wrong based on faith is that we know faiths conflict. There's many religions that are different faiths. And one will say that X happened and the other one will say that Y happened. Well, at most, one of them are true. So faith alone can't lead to knowledge. It can't lead to justified true belief. You need to somehow have some reasons behind it as well. And finally, they move on to mystical experiences. And somebody might have some kind of vision or dream, and from that vision or dream, they think they know something. But that one person had that experience, and when they tell other people about it, it's just hearsay. If somebody tells you, I know something's true because I dreamt it, well, you have the choice of believing them or not. And even if you have a dream and you wake up, I've had some weird dreams, and I don't know whether they're really a vision of the future or not. I think it's just random stuff usually that happens in my head at night. But if someone tells you they just know it's true because they dreamt it, well, so many people have said something like that and it turns out not to be true. Furthermore, many of the people who have kind of hallucination, mystical experiences, usually they've been fasting or been in prolonged solitude or sensory deprivation or something which we know scientifically can bring on hallucinations. And finally, mystical experiences by different mystics also don't agree, just like faiths. We have different people with different dreams, and one will say this is going to happen, one will say another thing's going to happen. So they don't have a real good track record. Okay. So the chapter ends by asking you to reconsider one of the ways they learned about things in ancient Babylon. And that was astrology. And I know astrology is pretty popular. It's always been popular, and a large percentage, I don't know that it's over 50%, but a big portion of our society believes it. And they ask you to reconsider this belief. And they say, at first glance, astrology seems scientifically possible. In fact, one of the pieces of evidence which people who believe in astrology often give is that the moon affects the seasons and tides. You got high tide, low tide, and it goes higher and lower when it's a full moon and a new moon, and we can predict how high it's going to be. And we also know the human body is, about 2/3 water. So if the moon's affecting water, can't it somehow be affecting us and maybe the stars as well? So that's some evidence for it, but there's a lot of other evidence. If we're thinking of those scales I asked you to think about, okay, we got the water thing for it, but what have we got on the other side? And if you ask astronomers and scientists about astrology, it's for 99% or more who don't believe in it. Well, why is that? What is it that science has a problem with? Well, here's the number one way. The very first thing a scientist asks is, does it work? And in psychology, we've got personality tests. There's a lot of good personality tests out there. And what they did is, more than once, they have said, hey, let's look at all the personalities out there. And they gave people personality tests, and then they looked at all the different signs. What type of personality is a Gemini supposed to have? What type of personality is a Virgo supposed to have, etc. And then what they did was they took people who were supposed to be Virgos and looked at what a Virgo is supposed to be like, and it didn't match up. What they found was people's real personalities and how their personality was supposed to be. It was just random chance whether it lined up. Basically, 1 out of 12 people lined up with their sign, and there's 12 signs, so it wasn't any better than chance told us it should be. So that's the main reason why science doesn't believe it. If it somehow worked out that at greater than 1/12, people's personalities lined up, then scientists would say, hey, we don't know how it works, but we know that it works. And there's many things which science does treat that way. There's certain medicines. In fact, a large percentage of medicines, they're not exactly sure how it works, but they know, hey, if you take pill X, it cures condition Y. It also has side effect Z, but maybe they're worth it. What are some other reasons, though? Well, the personality traits of the signs are based on how the picture or the constellation should behave. So, for example, Geminis are supposed to be kind of two-faced, split personality. Taurus is supposed to be bullheaded or stubborn. And these are based upon the picture or what the constellation is supposed to be. And the first thing I ask you to do is Google the constellation and take a look at the stars. And you'll see that, very few of them really look like what they're supposed to do. The only exception is Scorpio. Kind of looks like a scorpion, even the Big Dipper, which is one of the, asterisms which really looks like something, that's supposed to be part of a bear. If you see the whole thing, it looks nothing like a bear. And what's more, there's a tail on the bear, and bears don't even have tails. So let's not get into that. Furthermore, it's kind of a version of the genetic fallacy. And most people I know don't like racism, and quite frankly, there's definitely a little bit of a racist quality to astrology. I mean, you'll hear people say something like, I'll never date an Aquarius again, or I love this sign or something like that. But, people can't choose when they were born, and that's something they're stuck with for the rest of their life, just like their skin color or race or something like that. And you would hate it if somebody wouldn't hire you because you were born in December or May or whatever it was. Should we really judge people, so quickly like that? Another reason astronomers don't believe astrology is the wobble of Earth's orbit has moved since the ancient Babylonians came up with this. And I have a little link on this to show you what the wobble is. Maybe when you were a kid, you played around with a top. Yeah. Well, that's mighty loud. Let's turn that down. But when you spin a top, you notice it wobbles like that, right? Well, the Earth wobbles as well, except the Earth is a lot heavier. And the wobble which it does takes thousands of years to happen. But since they made up the signs, the wobble of the Earth moving around has changed where the North Star is. We know that the North Star, Polaris wasn't always the North Star. It was a different star a couple thousand years ago. And they base your sign on which constellation was closest to the sun when you were born, and those constellations have changed since then. So really, the sign that you think you are has probably shifted by about 2 weeks, and you might not be the sign that you thought you were. If you look it up, you can find out what currently is, and it might turn out you're not the sign you've always thought you were. And one of the most important things is astrologers' predictions. If you ask an astronomer to predict something, you will get a very accurate, risky prediction. I am an amateur astronomer, and I went to see the 2017 eclipse, and I booked over a year in advance a place out in the desert, in eastern Oregon, and I knew where to drive. We rented a four-wheel drive car so we could go out to kind of a real dark sky area, and we knew when to get there and to the minute when the eclipse would happen. And in a few more years, if you Google Eclipse 2024, you can find some maps as well, and you'll notice that it's going to start in Mexico and it's going to go through Texas, and I'm lucky. An old friend from high school of mine lives in Austin, Texas. I've already made arrangements to drive out and visit him, and we're going to go and check out the eclipse, and I guarantee you that to the minute this map is going to be correct. And this is one of the best maps to go on. Find it, and it will show you not only where it's going to be, but to the minute where how long the eclipse will last. Like right here in the very center, it lasts about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. About halfway out, it'll be only 3 minutes something. And right here at the very edge, that's the place that you have to be to just see it, total for about 1 second. And if you're out here, it's just going to be a partial eclipse. So you can find the roads and figure out a place to drive to where you're going to get the longest amount of time. And if you look at on Google for future eclipses, they have these things calculated out for over 100 years, and they're always accurate to the second. I suppose the further out they get, one that they're talking about that's 100 years from now, it might be a second off. But this is the type of accuracy you get when you're dealing with science. So what I ask you to do is to compare that to the type of accuracy you get from astrologers. Next month, grab a magazine and look at your sign's, prediction of what's going to happen. And then grab a different newspaper or magazine, go to some other website, and, make sure it's not the same astrologer, because some of them, they are syndicated and they're on more than one website. But, look for a totally different astrologer and see what they say next month's going to be like for you. And you won't see that level of agreement. One might be saying it's a great month for love, and the other one will say it's a good time to just stay home alone. It's really different to the world of science. It can't give that level of predictive value that science can give. Science gives, as mentioned before, risky predictions, to say that this part of the Earth is going to go black, from the moon covering the sun years from now. There's a high chance you're going to be wrong. If you just randomly said it about some place, it's probably not going to happen. But if you've done the work, you'll get the results. Now, more modern theories of personality, nature and nurture, people's genes and their upbringing do a better job of predicting behaviors and personalities. And the best work has been done with separated twins. There was a great documentary you could stream for free on Netflix. I think it was called 3 Perfect Strangers, about triplets that were separated at birth and adopted out, and different families raised them. And even though some of the people who raised them were rich and Jewish and other people were poor and in another part of the country, they were all very similar, the brothers. And it's because our genes are such a big part of what we are. Now, astrology breaks many of the principles mentioned in this chapter and other ones, and its success, if you think that you've read some astrology and it seems like, oh, this certain astrologer, when I read them, it seems like it's accurate, it's probably to do with what's known as the Fourier effect, which is exactly what we saw in the James Randi video when the astrology predictions were given to all the students in the class, and almost all the students gave it a 4 or 5 of accuracy. And it turned out that it was the way it was written. And it's not a risky prediction. It's a very risk-free prediction. They say things that can be true of almost everyone, or they just give you, general advice, like you should try to do this month or something like that. It's not really making those risky predictions that science has delivered for us so many times. Well, that's it for Chapter 4. Thanks, and we will do Chapter 5 next week.